Welcome back, everybody. Today we're gonna clean up our index file. We're gonna take all the authentication stuff we have in there and we're gonna organize it neatly in a plugin, and the relevant stuff we're gonna put it in a Vuex store, and then we're gonna take a look at how we can leverage basically looking at the role of the user and change the UI based on that. Prior to the recording this episode, what I wanted to do is let me open up the index page. I wanted to grab all of this stuff and I wanted to shove it into a store, but then I encountered a lot of difficulties with basically just keeping it contained in this store. The fact that the store is getting spun up on the server side as well. So basically, if you want to try to move this into a store and then try to modify a page based on the user being signed in or not, pause the video here, try it yourself, see what kind of issues you run into so you can experience that, and then try the solution that I'm going to come up with. Okay, so I'm just warning you, this is not like an on-the-fly thing. This is something I practiced, so maybe try this yourself, but otherwise, let's go. So what I'm going to do is all this stuff, this is kind of like an initialization process, okay? So this is something that we want to do at the start of the application. For this, I'm going to create a plugin which is going to hook into our application's mounted function, okay? So I can't remember how to write a plugin already. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Nuxtjs, directory structure, plugins, and somewhere in here, inject root context. Hopefully you can see this. I think it was super simple, so stuff like this, right? Coming back here, just gonna copy the first example that they have here, and I'm going to create a JavaScript file. I'm gonna call it client initialization, and I'm gonna paste this in here. So the first thing is really the context. However, we do just want the application in here, and the application is literally our whole Vue application, that root component that you don't actually see there, okay? So all this stuff, really, we're not really that interested. However, this bit is the one that is the most interesting to us. Here is where we essentially want to replace this with our user manager, not manager, and then we should be able to use it like so around our application, okay? Instead of having a user manager instance somewhere here, it's just going to be available client side somewhere. And the way that we actually configure it to be available client side is we have to go into plugins here. We have to specify the source of where the plugin is coming from. And I think this is still in the documentation. So there is like client side or server side only. So you can either use a file notation or you can specify the mode. So is the plugin only going to be on client side or server side? We want it client side. So we have to specify the path, plugins client, init.js, and mode. We're going to put client, okay? So now this is only available on the client side. On server side, this plugin is not going to be utilized. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to grab our user manager here. Let's just get rid of the namespace. We are going to grab the whole user manager and we are going to const user manager, create it, paste this stuff in here. We can then alt enter and import this stuff. And at this point, let's go ahead and verify that this is more or less working. So everywhere where we had the user manager, let's delete this. And instead, what we're going to do here is we're going to use $auth instead. And I'm just going to, not Ctrl+Shift+F, but Ctrl+F, user manager, or MGR maybe we called it. Nope. Okay, can't see it. So I'm going to assume that we have replaced all the instances. Going back to the application, let's open up F12. Let's give this a refresh, go to the console. Everything seems fine. Let's try to log in. We'll do test, password, and it seems like we sign in, we attach the token. And again, the token registration works fine as well, okay? But if we land on a different page, this is where the token is actually not going to be attached. So this is that part where I actually want to do some initialization here as well. So let's go ahead and move stuff into the centralized state. So the way that you can think about this is with the plugin. If you understand dependency injection, where we have a new class with a service and we're just basically injecting it into our application to be surfaced anywhere within it, just like dependency injection. And then we have our Vuex store, which is just centralized state. And again, that's just kind of like a service, but you can think of it as a mini in-memory database sort of thing. So what do we want to do? Let's go ahead and bring up a store. So this store, JavaScript file, we're going to call it auth, and export a default state, or maybe just state. I'll have to peek in and export const state. Okay, so we prefix it with const, but we're just going to copy about yay much in its state. Yep, state is fine. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a user here that's going to start with null. Okay, so what I'm planning on doing is I'm going to do this initialization in my client only, right? So client only, this initialization is going to get called. The user is going to get populated only once we return to the client. Okay, let's get an action which is going to populate this, and a mutation that is going to save this to the store, right? So export const mutations as well, and we will say save user state, and I think, yeah, user state user equals user. Super simple. I think we can miss the semicolon. Initialize, maybe, I think. We'll need to commit. And the other thing, do we pass anything? I don't think we do. Let's see if we can just keep it at this. So the thing that we're going to do here is actually, let's just go ahead and copy this from the index page. So I'm just going to go ahead, cut this. Again, just delete the created with the process only, because the plugin is only going to get triggered on the client side, so it shouldn't even trigger this initialization. I'm going to put this here, and the auth service is obviously still available here. Now, instead of this, I will just go ahead and make sure that I commit to save the user, and I'm passing the user here, and let's make sure I put it inside of an object. And what I will do is I'll actually return the promise from here. I'll also get a loading, and from the beginning it's always loading true, and at the end we'll do something like finish, right, and state, and anything else that will basically say authentication initialization has finished, you may start using the application to its full throttle. Okay, so state loading false, we have finished loading, and basically, in case this errors or whatnot, we might let's do something about the error. But finally, it doesn't matter what we really get, we want to commit finish. Okay, and I really don't think we need the semicolon, but yeah. Now what we want to do is we actually want to trigger this initialization function. So what I'm going to do is in the index store, the main store, I'll grab the Nux server in it. I'm going to copy it, and I will rename it to client init. And the thing that I'm going to dispatch is auth initialize. Now, in my plugin, I have access to the context of the application. So this is this context here. And what I actually want as well is the store. Okay, so our next application, the way that we can interact with the store, you can see how we're getting Axios here, and how we get the router, and how we can do this dot store or $store, right? It's the same sort of thing. We're basically this instance, this that we're using here, that not only is the component, but the $sign is kind of grabbing it from the Nuxt context. I'm just trying to paint a picture, but it's essentially the overall Nuxt application, and then our components kind of sit in there. This in the components refers to the component. Here we actually get the context of the application. Okay, so app, we're gonna need it. for reasons why I show some, why I will show, but for now we're just gonna use the store, we're gonna run into some errors, and then we're gonna fix them, right? I'm gonna try to explain what is going on. On the store, what we'll do is we'll just do a sneaky dispatch. I don't know if I can even call it sneaky, but we're just dispatching to client initialize. You know, nothing sneaky about it. We just dispatch, right? So dispatch, this should go initialize this bit. If there are any other initializations that we want to do, we can do them from here. Now, the rest of the stuff, so these things we'll clean them up in a second. We're gonna move them about, but primary thing that we want to do right now is we just want to verify that our Vuex store is getting initialized and stuff is being put in there, and then we're gonna see what we can do with the UI. So let's go Control F5, refresh this. Let's see, cannot get property get user of undefined. So let's take a look at this, and probably because we most likely want to dispatch this after we initialize this whole thing, right? So we actually create it and then we dispatch it. We can also make this asynchronous, pretty sure, and we can wait on this to actually happen. Not sure if that's actually what we want, but let's see. Let's see if the error goes away first. So the error has gone away. Let's go ahead and log in here. Okay, so we log in. So if we go into Vuex, we take a look at the store. I'm going to press this button to commit all. So it basically records your actions. So you have an event log of things that happened to your Vuex store, and then you commit them all so you can see the current state as it is. So the user object is there, right? So what we can do now is we can kind of work around some stuff that basically is going to give us a few handy getters that are going to be like, is this user authenticated, right? Where we're going to have the state. If it's loading, right? If it's not loading, then we want to say is user doesn't equal null. Then we're authenticated, right? Because and the user comes from the state, not the United States, from our state, right? And then we can do something like copy this line, ask if he is a moderator. We want to reference the getter of this authenticated to basically say, has this user authenticated? Because if it's going to be null, we're not going to be able to seep down into the profile and get the role in there, okay? So what we want to do is we want to go getters authenticated if the user is authenticated, and state.user profile, yeah, and role equals, and here what we want to do is again do this kind of enum stuff. So let's bring up startup real quick. The role that we have defined is role. The role that we have defined is mod. Okay, so let's go back here, and what we're gonna do is we're just gonna create const roles equals new object, moderator equals mod, and you gotta do the semicolons, just colons. We'll do roles moderator, and if the user's role equals to the moderator, we good, it's the moderator. And we also check if he's authenticated first, and that runs here, right? So we have two very convenient getters that we can use. Now, another thing that I wanted to do, okay, that was a brief error. I shall forgive. I'm gonna leave a link for all of this in the description, obviously. But another thing that I want to do is I want to go to Beautify, and let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna just look for skeletal loaders. I'm gonna pretend like I'm gonna grab this out from my memory. I'm definitely not. Reading for the documentation, you basically, it's gonna tell you you have two ways of implementing this, either through the VF or a default inner slot of the vSkeleton. So let's go in here and grab the vSkeletons that we got here. So vSkeleton loader, and we have the vcard inside, right? So I'm just gonna grab that, and I'm gonna go on to where is it? Onto the layouts, onto the default layout, right? This is where I'm gonna start putting my sign-in buttons and stuff like that. And what I want to do is basically, you're gonna get the server-side rendered a view of the application, and once it loads in the browser, that's when it's gonna start to basically communicate with the identity source. Like, is this guy authenticated, or is it's gonna try to check the state, whatever. During that brief moment, that's when I kind of want to say, or do a little bit of loading. And I think this pretty much happens with any website that you haven't visited before. So you can go ahead, test this out, open incognito window, visit some kind of website and see what they do. Like, I think YouTube's another great example of this. But let's go ahead, take a look at this. So instead of the card, what we want to do is we will have a button, and I will put a V icon in here, and MDI account circle, I think it was, icon outlined. I'll do something like sign in. Let's put it here. Maybe no, it doesn't want it on one line, but anyway, so the loading bits, we actually have that. So what we want to do is let's bring this out from computed. We will need map state. Yep, let's import that from Vuex. And we'll be importing from auth, and we will be grabbing loading. We'll obviously grab the user later to kind of display the profile and whatnot, but for now we're keeping it simple with just, you know, putting stuff in the correct places. And then we will map getters as well, and we'll grab that from Vuex as well. And we will grab the authenticated getter, and we can also grab the moderator getter. Okay, so we navigate to it, right, we get it. So we have the loading bit. This is where we can supply the loading transition. Going back to the site here, let's go ahead and look for transition. I think there should be some sample transitions in here. Maybe the next one, transition component. Okay, so we get bound to a transition. If we take a look at the scripts, what kind of transitions do we have? Fade transition. Let's take a look at how they look. This is scale transition. Yeah. I think the fade transition is way better. But you know, you're the one making your website. Make it pop. You know, put wherever you like. But anyway, the type. Again, let's go back up here, and I think I remember this one is just button, but here you essentially have the type, and it's just whatever component it's gonna try to imitate while you're loading it. So in our case, it's just a button. So the button will remove height, and let's just delete a little bit too many spaces, separate these out a little bit, and that should be it for now. Let's take a look at that. Definitely don't want the icon there. Let's take a look. Okay, so there's the sign in button. There seems to be very little space between all of these, but that's okay. So let's see what this is going to look like if we just supply true, and this is just going to be loading, and basically there is that button. Okay. And this is what we want to display while it's, you know, while it's loading. And the same thing goes for moderation and create. So moderation, let's do a VF moderator, okay? For content creation dialog, because everybody will be able to see this, let's go ahead and put this here. And the content creation dialog, we'll put it in here. But again, we're just gonna have the same skeletal loader here. So let me separate these out. Maybe it will be a little bit easier to copy this if you are copying this. But this is essentially it. We're just like loading the two buttons and then making them look like that. So let's take a look at what this looks like. Let's clear this out. Let's give this a big refresh. So now we want to take a look at why it's still loading. So let's take a look at the state. Commit all of this. Loading is false. Let's double check that we're grabbing loading from the correct space. We are. Let's go back. Let's go back up here. And we're just supplying loading as true. So let's actually supply our loading. Let's go ahead, Control F5 this. Okay. And there's one error, and this is the part where I was kind of like, huh? Okay. So the client side rendered virtual DOM tree is not matching server rendered content. This is likely caused by incorrect HTML markup, for example, nesting block level elements inside blah blah blah, bailing, hydration, and performing full client side render. So this is a bit of a hard error. So if you encounter this on your own, I think it could be hard to solve, but the first steps that essentially people suggest online is try to find out which components are causing this. So small iterations when you are developing features is definitely preferred way with Nuxt, because then if you get into this error, and it's really hard to solve unless you know exactly which component is solving it, or even begin to start solving it. So since these are the only components that we have rendered, right, let's refresh this. So Control F5, clear the logs. We still get it. Next thing, we can try to do something along the lines of remove the second skeletal loader, and it's gone, right? So now what we do is we work with the one skeletal loader. What if we just uncomment the button, right? So refresh this, and the error is gone, right? So the problem is that the UI is changing way too soon. So if we go to Nuxtjs, and again, I'm just going to refer to the documentation. So in case you are going to run into these errors on your own, you know where to sort of look. So at this point, for me, I mean, I was like scouring through the documentation. I was like, where, what? And the part that we want to look at are the lifecycle hooks. So there are a few more lifecycle hooks in Nuxtjs than there are in Vuex. So go ahead on this page. I'm going to leave a link in the description and read through this. Everything's laid out super nice. So the part that we're interested is this client. So this is essentially the steps through which this goes. So we have receives the HTML, loading assets, and then view hydration. Okay, so this is the part where the error was saying there was bailing hydration, and this is the part that I haven't understood. And if I am going to exactly find out why this works like this, I'm going to leave a comment and I'm going to pin it so everybody else can know as well. Otherwise, if you know, leave a comment and tell me, right? But then essentially whatever middleware we have specified on the page, or basically global, layout, and route, that order, and then async data, if there's any async data on the page, that's going to get triggered. Then client-side Nuxtjs plugin. So this is the stage which we're at, and you see we're quite far away from hydration. So I'm not sure, in my mind, this is hydration has been performed, and we have already initialized. So I don't know why we're seeing this error exactly, but I do know how to work around this issue. And what I essentially did is I just said, right, let's just move down and down this ladder as far away from hydration as possible, as close as we can, to right before letting the user, well, essentially we have the app finished loading at first render kind of thing, and hydration happens somewhere here, and we're slowly moving here. And with the plugin, we sit somewhere in the middle. So what I'm doing is I'm going to slowly move here, and that's essentially what I did. So I tried the before created hook and created hook. So to kind of give you an idea, if I put this here, if I uncomment this, I go to client init, and this store dispatch, I'm just going to take it away from here, and I'm going to take the dispatch that I'm doing here. I'm going to go into the default, and on here we can go to created. Mounted is the thing that solves it. So store, we are going to dispatch, and we're going to dispatch client init, right? So again, I'm going to refresh this, and I'm going to get essentially a completely different error. So at this point, we don't even have the auth bit. So this is the part where we're here, so we can try before mount. So if we go back to default, we'll do something like before mount, and we can also place this sort of stuff on individual pages as well. So let's go ahead, try this. So Control F5 here, and there we go. So this seems like it handles it, so we don't have an error. And actually surprised before, because before I tried the before mount and that didn't work, so I am quite surprised here. Then we have the fetch. We can actually try sticking it in the fetch and seeing what happens. So let's give this a refresh. So that's cool. Let's try to fetch this. We are going to return this. We're going to refresh here, and I mean, all good. So let's actually hook into the fetch function. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove here, and we are going to create a fetch function for our application. As I said before, application is the root component of our whole application, where all our pages and components live. They're all attached to this one single app. Okay, so on our app, we want to grab the fetch function, and we just want to say, all right, this fetch function right here, this is where we want to do this initialization. And now essentially, no matter what layout, what page we land on, as long as our application loads, this should execute in the correct life cycle. So right here, after created, and load our application. So, and there it is. And because I don't think we are signed in as anything, or are we signed in? Let me double check. So actually, yeah, we are signed in. Otherwise, we wouldn't get the thing. Yeah, we are signed in. We're just not a moderator, so we're just not getting the button. So that's actually okay. So let's change this up a little bit. Let's go into the layout. On here, we're gonna specify left. So the icon goes to the left a little bit, gets a little bit smaller. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say VF not authenticated, or we can do something like actually, because I think positives are a little bit more easier to handle. If authenticated, the else login, and we can do something like maybe outline here, and maybe profile. Let's see. Okay, and one thing is make these buttons depressed a little bit. There we go. Let's get this upper button to be outlined as well. So outlined, kind of like user empty sort of thing, and then this one's going to be filled with profile. Okay, so saving that. Cool. Let's try log out. So there was loading. Again, we can do different stuff to this, like give it maybe a little bit more padding, I think. Not padding, but margin. I think that would look okay. Put this here and on this button as well, because that's going to get loaded after. So there we are. Yeah, the outline icon looks a little bit wonky. Let's see, does it do anything? We didn't actually attach anything to it. So, okay, let's grab some of these functions, right? And attach them. So we don't really need specific functions or put them in the store. We can just trigger them like we do here. So if we go on the default layout, if we go into sign in, and what was that? Just a second. It's like it's such a little sperm icon, man. But anyway, here we have the authentication sign-in redirect, right? So we're just referencing our plugins straight away. For the sign-out redirect, let's go ahead and get our button in there as well. So I'm actually going to place this here. I'm going to get rid of the logout. I'm going to get rid of the login, cut the logout, and I'm going to go here, and we are going to move this button later, but I am just going to put this maybe here, and I'm not going to worry about margin too much because this is going to change. Okay, so sign in, we want to display this only if authenticated. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Cool. Let's try to sign in. Let's sign in as mod, password, and there we are. Okay, so one thing that's this button should be depressed. So let me close this. Let's give this a refresh. There it is. So we can see the little load. Let's try the login again. I feel like mod password sign in. Okay, so that was quite quick. But anyway, the moderation works. So other stuff we have to do is like implement middleware. So we only allow actual moderators to visit this page. But again, this can actually be influenced. So it's not so important that moderators can visit certain pages and guests can't. If you are a developer, you will be able to simulate client behavior. The important part is securing our backend, okay? But nevertheless, this will be it for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section. I also stream on Sundays and Wednesdays around 6 o'clock London time. So if you're into that kind of thing, come say hi. Also, don't forget to join my Discord server, and I'll see you in my next episode.